The doubters Major Sarah Hawk Rodriguez stood in the briefing room, her uniform crisp and her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing enemy positions deep in hostile territory. The room buzzed with tension as senior officers debated the impossible mission ahead. Intelligence reports indicated that a downed pilot was trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by sophisticated anti-aircraft systems that made conventional rescue attempts suicide missions. "The terrain is too rough, the enemy too entrenched," Colonel Mitchell declared, his weathered face showing years of combat experience. Any aircraft flying that low would be torn apart by ground fire before it could even locate the pilot. Sarah had been studying the mission parameters for hours. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed the Warthog, was built for low-altitude combat, but even this legendary aircraft had its limits. The enemy had positioned their defenses in a narrow canyon, where radar-guided missiles could track any aircraft attempting a rescue. The walls were too steep for helicopters, and the distance too far for ground forces to reach in time. Other pilots in the room shook their heads as they examined the intelligence photos. The canyon looked like a death trap, with missile launchers positioned on both sides and machine gun nests covering every possible approach. Several experienced pilots had already volunteered and been turned down by command, deemed too valuable to risk on what many considered a suicide mission. But Sarah saw something different in those aerial photographs. While others focused on the threats, she noticed the shadows cast by the canyon walls during different times of day. There was a brief window each morning when the sun's angle created a blind spot in the enemy's radar coverage. It would require flying at an altitude so low that the aircraft would be skimming just feet above the canyon floor, using the terrain to mask its approach. "There might be a way," Sarah said quietly, stepping closer to the display. The room fell, silent as she traced her finger along what appeared to be an impossible flight path. "If we time it perfectly with the morning sun angle and use the canyon walls for cover, we could stay below their radar horizon." Colonel Mitchell's eyebrows raised skeptically. "Major, that would require flying at less than 50 feet above ground, level through a canyon barely wider than the A-10's wingspan. One slight miscalculation and you'd be a crater in the desert floor." Sarah had anticipated this reaction. Throughout her career, she had faced skepticism about her abilities as both a woman in a male-dominated field and as someone willing to take calculated risks that others deemed impossible. She had proven herself countless times in training and combat, but this mission would push both her skills and her aircraft to their absolute limits. The intelligence officer cleared his throat nervously. "Major Rodriguez, the pilot we're trying to rescue has been on the ground for 18 hours. His emergency beacon is getting weaker, and satellite imagery shows enemy patrols closing in on his position. We estimate he has maybe 6 hours before capture or worse." Time was running out, and conventional wisdom suggested that this rescue was impossible. But Sarah had spent years studying unconventional tactics, learning to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. Her instructors at flight school had initially doubted whether someone of her smaller stature could handle the physical demands of flying the A-10, one of the most challenging aircraft in the military arsenal. She had silenced those doubters by becoming one of the most skilled low-altitude pilots in the squadron, earning her call sign Hawk for her ability to swoop down on targets with deadly precision before disappearing back into the landscape. Her fellow pilots respected her technical expertise and her calm decision-making under pressure, but this mission would test every skill she had developed over her military career. "Give me 12 hours to study the terrain maps and weather patterns," Sarah requested. "I think I can plot a course that gets us in and out without triggering their defenses." Colonel Mitchell studied her face, seeing the determination that had made her one of his most trusted pilots. "Major, I've seen you pull off some incredible flying, but this is different. You're talking about threading a needle while flying through a hurricane." Sarah nodded solemnly, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. But somewhere in that hostile canyon, a fellow pilot was waiting for rescue, counting on his brothers and sisters in arms to bring him home. The enemy expected them to approach from high altitude or attempt a ground rescue. They wouldn't be watching for an aircraft crazy enough to fly through the canyon itself, using the very terrain they thought protected them as a highway to their prisoner. The briefing room remained quiet as Sarah gathered the intelligence photos and mission data. She knew that by morning she would either be preparing for the most dangerous flight of her career or watching helplessly as a fellow pilot became another casualty of war. The choice was no longer about whether the mission was possible. It was about whether she was skilled enough to make the impossible happen. Outside the briefing room, word was already spreading through the base about the female major who thought she could fly where others feared to tread. Some whispered that it was reckless bravado, while others remembered her track record of turning impossible situations into successful missions. What everyone agreed on was that if anyone could pull off this crazy rescue attempt, it would be Hawk Rodriguez. As Sarah walked toward her quarters to begin her mission planning, she carried the weight of not just one pilot's life, but the reputation of every woman who had fought to prove themselves in combat aviation. Tomorrow's dawn would determine whether the doubters were right or whether determination and skill could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah spread the detailed topographical maps across her desk, the harsh fluorescent lights of her quarters casting sharp shadows across the canyon terrain. It was well past midnight, but sleep was impossible when a fellow pilot's life hung in the balance. She had requested every piece of intelligence available: satellite photos taken at different times of day, weather reports, enemy movement patterns, and technical specifications of the radar systems guarding the canyon. The more she studied the mission, the more complex it became. The canyon was 12 miles long, with walls rising nearly 300 feet on both sides. At its narrowest point, there was barely 60 feet of clearance, just 20 feet wider than her A-10's wingspan. The enemy had positioned their defenses assuming any rescue attempt would come from above, but Sarah was planning to fly through the canyon itself, staying below the rim where their radar couldn't detect her approach. Her calculations showed that she would need to maintain an airspeed of exactly 240 knots while flying at an altitude of just 30 feet above the canyon floor. Any faster, and she would lose maneuverability in the tight spaces. Any slower, and she would become an easy target for the machine gun nests positioned along the canyon walls. The margin for error was essentially zero. A single mistake would mean certain death. The weather forecast complicated things further. Morning fog was common in the canyon, which could provide additional cover but would also reduce visibility to dangerous levels. Sarah would be flying by instruments and memory through a course she had never actually flown, relying on her ability to visualize the terrain from studying photographs and maps. She contacted the meteorology unit to get precise wind speed and direction forecasts for the target time window. The canyon's unique geography created unpredictable air currents that could slam an aircraft into the walls without warning. Sarah needed to understand these patterns to avoid the invisible traps that had likely claimed other aircraft in the past. Lieutenant Hayes, her weapons systems officer, knocked on her door at 2 a.m. "Major, I heard about the mission. I want to volunteer to fly with you." Sarah looked up from her maps, seeing the determination in the younger officer's eyes. "Hayes, this isn't a standard combat mission. I'll be flying so low that the usual escape procedures won't work. If something goes wrong, we won't have time to eject." Hayes sat down across from Sarah, studying the mission maps spread across the desk. "Ma'am, that pilot down there trained me when I first joined the squadron. He taught me that we never leave anyone behind, no matter the odds." Sarah appreciated the loyalty, but she also understood the responsibility of command. "The aircraft will be lighter and more maneuverable with just one pilot. Every pound of weight matters when we're flying this close to the edge of what's possible." Over the next several hours, Sarah refined her flight plan down to the second. She identified 3 specific checkpoints where she would need to make precise altitude adjustments to avoid rock formations that jutted into the canyon. The timing had to be perfect. She would enter the canyon at exactly 0647 hours, when the sun angle created maximum radar shadow, locate the downed pilot, and extract him before the enemy patrols converged on their position. The rescue itself presented another challenge. The pilot's emergency beacon indicated he was positioned on a small ledge about halfway up the canyon wall. Sarah would need to hover the A-10 in an impossible position, maintaining stability while the pilot climbed aboard. A-10s weren't designed for rescue operations, but Sarah had been working with the maintenance crew to modify the aircraft's equipment bay to accommodate a rescued pilot. Chief Master Sergeant Williams arrived at dawn with the technical modifications Sarah had requested. Major, we've reinforced the equipment compartment and installed emergency oxygen supply, but I have to tell you, this bird wasn't built for passenger service. The pilot will be exposed to significant G-forces during the extraction. Sarah nodded, knowing that some discomfort was preferable to capture by enemy forces. How long will it take to complete the modifications? Williams checked his watch. Another 2 hours, ma'am. But there's something else you should know. Word about this mission has reached the squadron. Half the pilots are saying you're crazy, and the other half are saying you're the only one crazy enough to pull it off. The pressure of representing not just her own abilities, but the capabilities of all female combat pilots weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. She had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts to earn respect in the aviation community, and this mission would either cement her reputation as an exceptional pilot or end her career in a canyon wall. Colonel Mitchell arrived at A-10 for a final mission briefing. Major, I've been reviewing your flight plan with the tactical team. The consensus is that what you're proposing has never been attempted because it's physically impossible. Sarah had anticipated this final attempt to dissuade her. Sir, with respect, everything we do in combat aviation was once considered impossible. The A-10 was designed to fly low and survive in hostile environments. I'm just pushing those capabilities to their intended limits. The colonel studied the mission timeline Sarah had prepared. Every detail was accounted for, from fuel consumption to radio communication windows. Major, if you're determined to attempt this rescue, you'll have full support from command. But understand that we can't provide backup. If something goes wrong in that canyon, you'll be completely on your own. Sarah gathered her flight gear, knowing that within hours, she would either be celebrating a successful rescue or becoming another casualty statistic. The planning phase was complete, and now everything depended on her ability to execute a plan that pushed both human skill and aircraft performance beyond their tested limits. As she walked toward the flight line, Sarah carried with her not just the technical knowledge needed to navigate the impossible terrain, but the responsibility of proving that courage and careful planning could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The doubters would soon learn whether their skepticism was justified or whether determination could indeed make the impossible possible. The pre-dawn darkness at the airbase buzzed with unusual activity, as ground crews made final preparations for what many considered either a heroic rescue attempt or elaborate suicide mission. Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection of the modified A-10, checking every system twice while mechanics finished installing the emergency oxygen equipment for the rescued pilot. Her aircraft had been stripped of all non-essential equipment to reduce weight and improve maneuverability. Extra fuel tanks were loaded to extend range, while specialized navigation equipment was installed to help maintain precise altitude control during the dangerous canyon flight. The modifications represented hundreds of hours of engineering work, compressed into a single night. Chief Williams approached with the final maintenance report. Major, everything checks out mechanically, but I have to ask, have you ever flown terrain this challenging before? Sarah strapped on her helmet, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with every combat mission. Chief, nobody has flown terrain this challenging before. That's exactly why it might work. The weather report showed optimal conditions for the mission window. Morning fog would provide additional cover during the approach, while wind speeds remained within acceptable parameters for the precision flying required. Sarah had memorized every detail of the canyon geography, but actually flying through it would test her skills beyond anything she had experienced in training. Colonel Mitchell arrived for the final mission authorization. Major Rodriguez Intelligence confirms the downed pilot's beacon is still active, but enemy patrol activity has increased significantly. You'll have a very narrow window to complete this rescue before the area becomes completely compromised. Sarah reviewed the mission timeline. One final time. Launch at 6:30 hours. Arrive at canyon entrance at 6:45. Complete the rescue by 700 and return to base before enemy reinforcements could respond. Every minute was critical, and any delay would transform a difficult mission into an impossible one. The squadron gathered on the flight line as Sarah taxied toward the runway. Many of her fellow pilots had expressed doubts about the mission's feasibility, but their presence at this early hour demonstrated their respect for her courage and their hope for the rescue's success. Some had even volunteered to fly escort missions, though Sarah had declined, knowing that additional aircraft would only complicate the delicate operation. Lieutenant Hayes ran up to the aircraft as Sarah prepared for takeoff. "Major, I found something in the intelligence files you should know. The pilot you're rescuing, his call sign is Guardian. He earned it by rescuing 3 pilots during a mission last year when everyone else thought they were lost." This information added emotional weight to an already challenging mission. Guardian had risked his life to save others, and now Sarah was risking hers to return the favor. The military brotherhood demanded that no one be left behind, but this rescue would require skills and courage that few pilots possessed. Air traffic control cleared Sarah for immediate takeoff as the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. The timing was crucial. She needed to reach the canyon exactly when the sun angle created optimal radar shadow, while providing enough light for visual navigation. Her flight plan called for a route that avoided all known enemy positions until the final approach to the canyon. The A-10 lifted off smoothly despite its modified configuration and heavy fuel load. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied every combat mission, but this time it was amplified by the knowledge that she was attempting something no pilot had ever tried before. The aircraft responded normally to her controls, giving her confidence that the modifications wouldn't affect flight performance during the critical rescue phase. 40 miles from the target area, Sarah began her descent toward the canyon entrance. Radio communications would be limited once she dropped below the rim, leaving her completely isolated during the most dangerous portion of the mission. Her last contact with base control confirmed that enemy activity remained at expected levels, with no indication they were aware of the incoming rescue attempt. The canyon appeared ahead as a dark scar in the desert landscape, its walls catching the early morning light. From her current altitude, it looked impossibly narrow and treacherous. Sarah checked her instruments one final time, ensuring all systems were functioning perfectly before beginning the most challenging flight of her career. She switched her radio to the emergency frequency used by downed pilots. "Guardian, this is Hawk. I'm 5 minutes out from your position. Prepare for immediate extraction." A weak but determined voice crackled through the static. "Hawk, Guardian here. I can see enemy patrols moving in my direction. Whatever you're planning, make it fast." Sarah took a deep breath and began her descent toward the canyon entrance. The walls rose up on both sides as she dropped below the rim, immediately cutting her off from outside communication and radar coverage. She was now completely on her own, flying through hostile territory at an altitude that left no margin for error. The canyon walls seemed to close in around her aircraft as she adjusted her heading to follow the winding course she had memorized from the maps. Every rock formation and curve had to be navigated with perfect precision, as even a slight miscalculation would result in catastrophic impact with the canyon walls. Enemy positions became visible along the rim as Sarah flew deeper into the canyon. Machine gun nests and missile launchers were positioned to cover conventional approach routes, but their operators weren't looking down into the canyon itself. Sarah's unconventional approach was working exactly as planned, but the most dangerous portions of the mission still lay ahead. The modification to her aircraft performed flawlessly as she maneuvered through increasingly narrow sections of the canyon. Her altitude indicator showed just 25 feet of clearance above the rocky floor, while the canyon walls provided natural camouflage from enemy detection systems. Guardian's position was still 3 miles ahead, and Sarah could see on her instruments that fuel consumption was slightly higher than planned due to the demanding low-altitude flying. Every decision from this point forward would determine whether both pilots returned home safely or became casualties in this unforgiving terrain. The canyon walls towered above Sarah's A-10 as she navigated the narrow passage at breakneck speed. Her altimeter showed just 20 feet between her aircraft and the rocky floor below, while the walls on either side provided less than 30 feet of clearance from her wingtips. Flying at this altitude required absolute concentration, as the slightest deviation could prove fatal. Rock formations that appeared manageable on satellite photos became menacing obstacles when approached at 240 knots. Sarah adjusted her flight path continuously, following the canyon's natural curves while maintaining the precise altitude needed to stay below enemy radar. The morning fog she had hoped would provide cover was thicker than anticipated, reducing visibility and forcing her to rely heavily on instruments. Enemy positions became visible along the canyon rim as Sarah flew deeper into the hostile territory. Machine gun nests and surface-to-air missile launchers were positioned to intercept conventional rescue attempts, but their operators were scanning the skies above, not watching for an aircraft flying through the canyon itself. Sarah's unconventional approach was working perfectly, but she knew her luck wouldn't hold indefinitely. The radio crackled with Guardian's voice, weaker now but still determined. "Hawk, I can hear your engines echoing through the canyon. Enemy. Patrol is less than 100 meters from my position and closing fast. You need to hurry." Sarah checked her navigation display and realized she was approaching the most challenging section of her flight path. The canyon narrowed to just 50 feet across, while making a sharp left turn around a massive rock formation. At her current speed, she would have less than 2 seconds to execute the turn while maintaining safe clearance from the walls. Her hands gripped the controls as she approached the turn, feeling the A-10 respond to her inputs with the precision that it made. It legendary among close support aircraft. The rock walls rushed past her cockpit windows as she banked into the turn, pulling G-forces that tested both her endurance and the aircraft's structural limits. Successfully navigating the turn, Sarah found herself in a straight section of canyon that led directly to Guardian's position. Her fuel gauges showed consumption slightly above projected levels due to the demanding flight profile, but she still had sufficient reserves for the rescue and return journey. The modification to her aircraft was performing flawlessly under conditions no engineer had ever imagined testing. Guardian's emergency beacon appeared on her instruments, indicating his position on a ledge approximately 40 feet above the canyon floor. The ledge was barely large enough for one person and offered no room for error during the pickup. Sarah would need to position her aircraft with perfect precision while hovering in the unstable air currents created by the canyon walls. Enemy voices echoed from above as patrol units moved along the canyon rim. They hadn't detected Sarah's presence yet, but Guardian's location would soon be discovered if the rescue wasn't completed quickly. The mission timeline was holding, but barely, and any delay would transform a difficult rescue into an impossible. When Sarah spotted Guardian on his precarious perch, waving frantically to signal his readiness for extraction. He appeared injured but mobile, which was fortunate since the rescue would require him to move quickly despite his physical condition. The enemy patrol sounds were getting closer, and Sarah estimated they had perhaps 2 minutes before Guardian's position would be overrun. Positioning the A-10 for the pickup required skills no flight instructor had ever taught. Sarah had to maintain a perfect hover while accounting for the unpredictable wind currents bouncing off the canyon walls. The aircraft's engines echoed thunderously through the narrow space, making stealth impossible but providing the power needed for the precision maneuvering. Guardian moved carefully along the narrow ledge toward the aircraft's modified passenger compartment. His flight suit was torn and stained with blood, indicating he had been injured during his initial crash, but his movement seemed strong enough to complete the boarding process. Sarah held the A-10 steady despite the challenging conditions, knowing that Guardian's life depended on her ability to maintain position. The sound of enemy vehicles reached the canyon as Sarah prepared to lift off with her rescued passenger. Guardian was safely aboard and connected to the emergency oxygen system, but the extraction had taken longer than planned. Enemy forces were now aware of the rescue attempt and would be repositioning to intercept Sarah's escape route. Guardians, aboard. Sarah radioed to base, knowing the transmission might not reach them from inside the canyon. Beginning extraction now. Sarah applied power to lift the heavily loaded aircraft away from the ledge. The additional weight of her passenger and the thin air at canyon altitude reduced the A-10's performance, requiring more careful handling during the climb out. Every foot of altitude gained was crucial for clearing the canyon walls during the escape phase. Enemy muzzle flashes appeared along the canyon rim as ground forces opened fire on Sarah's aircraft. The A-10's armored construction provided protection against small arms fire, but the concentrated fire from multiple positions created a dangerous gauntlet that had to be navigated while maintaining safe separation from the canyon walls. Bullet. Impacts rang against the aircraft's armor as Sarah maneuvered through the hostile fire. The A-10's reputation for survivability was being tested, under conditions its designers had never anticipated. Guardian, secured in the passenger compartment, could hear the impacts but remained calm, trusting in Sarah's ability to get them both home safely. Sarah's escape route led through the narrowest section of the canyon, where enemy fire would be most concentrated, but where the walls would also provide the best protection from radar-guided missiles. The next few minutes would determine whether her impossible rescue mission would end in triumph or tragedy. The canyon walls rushed past as Sarah pushed the A-10 to its performance limits while carrying the additional weight of her rescued passenger. Behind them, enemy forces were scrambling to set up blocking positions, but Sarah's unconventional escape route was already taking her beyond their ability to respond effectively. Sarah's A-10 thundered through the canyon with Guardian safely aboard, but their escape was far from certain. Enemy forces along the rim had spotted the aircraft and were directing concentrated fire into the narrow passage. Bullet impacts sparked off the A-10's titanium armor while Sarah maneuvered through the hostile gauntlet. Using every bit of cover the canyon walls could provide, the additional weight of her passenger reduced the aircraft's agility, forcing Sarah to plan her movements more carefully while enemy gunfire intensified around them. Guardian, secured in the modified passenger compartment, could feel every impact against the armor plating, but remained silent, understanding that any distraction could prove fatal during this critical phase of the escape. "Enemy positions are lighting us up from both sides," Sarah called over the intercom to Guardian. "Hold tight. We're going to have to climb out through the heaviest fire." The canyon began to widen as Sarah approached the exit point, but this also meant losing the protection of the narrow walls that had shielded them from radar detection. Enemy missile systems positioned along the rim would soon have clear targeting solutions once the A-10 climbed above the canyon's protection. Sarah's instrument panel showed multiple warning lights as enemy fire damaged non-critical systems. The A-10's legendary durability was being tested under combat conditions that pushed even its exceptional survival capabilities to their limits. Hydraulic pressure was dropping slowly, and the right engine was running slightly rough, but the aircraft continued to respond to her controls. Guardian's voice came through the intercom, steady despite their dangerous situation. "Hawk, I can see missile launchers being repositioned on the north rim. They're trying to set up a firing solution for when we clear the canyon walls." Sarah had anticipated this threat and had planned her escape route accordingly. Instead of climbing straight up from the canyon exit, she would continue flying at ultra-low altitude across the desert floor, using terrain features to mask her approach until she was beyond the effective range of the enemy missile systems. The canyon exit appeared ahead, marked by a dramatic opening where the narrow walls gave way to open desert. Sarah maintained her dangerously low altitude as the A-10 burst from the canyon into the morning sunlight. Enemy positions along the rim immediately began tracking the aircraft, but Sarah was already maneuvering toward her planned escape route. Surface-to-air missiles launched from multiple positions along the canyon rim, their exhaust trails creating deadly white lines across the desert sky. Sarah jinked hard left and right, pulling G-forces that tested both her endurance and Guardian's ability to remain conscious in the passenger compartment. The missiles, designed to engage high-altitude targets, struggled to track an aircraft flying just 30 feet above the desert floor. "Missiles in the air," Sarah announced, her voice calm despite the mortal danger. "Guardian, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The first missile overshot as Sarah dropped even lower, using a small ridgeline to break the weapon's radar lock. The second missile adjusted its trajectory, but was defeated by electronic countermeasures that had been upgraded specifically for this mission. The third missile came dangerously close, detonating just behind the A-10's tail section and sending shrapnel through the rear fuselage. Warning lights illuminated Sarah's instrument panel as shrapnel damaged the aircraft's tail section. Control response became sluggish, and she could feel the A-10 wanting to drift to the right due to damaged control surfaces. But the aircraft's redundant systems and robust construction allowed her to maintain controlled flight despite the battle. "Damage. We've taken some hits, but we're still flying. Sarah reported to Guardian. "How are you holding up back there?" Guardian's response showed the strain of the high-G maneuvering. "Still here, Hawk. That was some impressive flying. I've never seen anyone dodge missiles at that altitude." Sarah continued her low-altitude escape across the desert, staying below enemy radar coverage while gradually increasing distance from the hostile territory. Her fuel gauges showed consumption was higher than planned, due to the demanding flight profile and battle damage, but she calculated sufficient reserves to reach friendly territory. The radio crackled to life as Sarah flew beyond the range of enemy jamming equipment. "Hawk, this is base control. We're tracking multiple missile launches from your area. What's your status?" "Base control. Hawk here with Guardian aboard. We've sustained minor battle damage but are clear of immediate threats. Requesting emergency landing clearance and medical support on arrival." Colonel Mitchell's voice joined the radio conversation. "Outstanding work, Hawk. Medical teams are standing by and you're cleared for direct approach to runway 27. Asmire." The friendly airbase appeared on the horizon. Sarah reflected on the mission that had pushed both human skill and aircraft performance beyond their tested limits. The doubters who had claimed such a rescue was impossible would soon witness the safe return of two pilots who had refused to accept defeat. Guardian's voice carried emotion as he realized they had successfully escaped what many had considered certain death. "Hawk, I don't know how you pulled that off, but I owe you my life. That flying was something I've never seen before." Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion from the demanding flight. "Guardian, you would have done the same for any of us. That's what we do. We never leave anyone behind, no matter how impossible the odds might seem." The landing pattern at their home base was filled with aircraft from other squadrons that had come to witness the return of the impossible rescue mission. Sarah's A-10, damaged but still flying, represented proof that courage, skill, and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As Sarah lined up for her final approach, she knew that this mission would be remembered not just as a successful rescue, but as evidence that the boundaries of what was considered possible could be expanded by pilots willing to push beyond conventional limitations. Sarah's battle-damaged A-10 approached the runway as emergency vehicles positioned themselves along the flight line. The aircraft showed clear signs of combat damage, with shrapnel holes in the fuselage and hydraulic fluid streaming from damaged systems, but it maintained controlled flight thanks to the Thunderbolt's legendary resilience and Sarah's exceptional piloting skills. Ground crews and fellow pilots lined the runway to witness the return of what many had considered a suicide mission. Word of the successful rescue had spread throughout the base, transforming skepticism into admiration for the pilot who had accomplished what experts deemed impossible. The woman who had faced doubts about flying that low had not only survived but had brought home a fellow aviator. Sarah executed a flawless landing despite the aircraft's compromised systems, bringing the A-10 to a smooth stop as medical teams rushed to assist Guardian. Her hands trembled slightly as she shut down the engines, the adrenaline of the past 2 hours finally giving way to the realization of what she had accomplished. Guardian emerged from the passenger compartment under his own power, his injuries more extensive than initially apparent but not life-threatening. As medical personnel attended to his wounds, he insisted on thanking Sarah personally before being transported to the base hospital. "Major Rodriguez," Guardian said, his voice hoarse but strong. "I've been flying combat missions for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. You didn't just save my life. You redefined what's possible in military aviation." Colonel Mitchell approached as Sarah completed her post-flight inspection of the damaged aircraft. The shrapnel holes and hydraulic leaks told the story of a mission that had pushed both pilot and machine beyond their design limits, yet both had performed flawlessly when lives depended on their capabilities. "Major, I owe you an apology, Colonel," Mitchell said, his usual stern demeanor softened by genuine admiration. "When you proposed this mission, I thought it was impossible. You've not only proven me wrong, but have established new standards for what we consider achievable in rescue operations." The intelligence gained from Sarah's mission proved valuable beyond the immediate rescue success. Her flight through the canyon had revealed enemy positions and defensive gaps that could be exploited in future operations. The tactical information she gathered while flying at impossible altitudes would influence military strategy for years to come. Within hours, news of the rescue spread beyond their base to higher military commands. Sarah's mission demonstrated that unconventional thinking and exceptional skill could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The female pilot, who had faced skepticism throughout her career, had proven that gender was irrelevant when courage and competence were required. The maintenance crew's post-flight inspection revealed the extent of battle damage the A-10 had sustained. Despite multiple impacts from enemy fire and shrapnel from a near-miss missile explosion, the aircraft's critical systems had continued functioning. The combination of superior engineering and exceptional piloting had made survival possible under impossible conditions. Sarah's squadron mates gathered around her as she debriefed the mission with intelligence officers. Pilots who had initially doubted the feasibility of her rescue plan now listened intently as she described the techniques used to navigate the canyon at ultra-low altitude. Her flight profile would be studied and potentially incorporated into future training programs. The key was understanding that the enemy's defenses were designed to counter conventional approaches, Sarah explained to the debrief team. By doing something they considered impossible, we were able to operate in terrain they thought was completely secure. Within days, Sarah's rescue mission became a case study at military aviation schools. The combination of careful planning, innovative thinking, and flawless execution under extreme pressure represented the best qualities of military aviation. Student pilots would study her techniques for years to come, learning that the boundaries of possibility could be expanded through skill and determination. The female pilot, who had been told that flying that low couldn't be done, had not only proved the doubters wrong, but had established new benchmarks for rescue operations in hostile territory. Her success opened discussions about expanding the tactical envelope for future missions, showing that aircraft capabilities extended beyond their published specifications when operated by exceptional pilots. Guardian made a full recovery and returned to flight status within weeks. He insisted that his first mission back should be flying as Sarah's wingman, wanting to learn from the pilot who had redefined his understanding of what was achievable in combat aviation. Their partnership would become legendary within the squadron. Sarah received official recognition for her actions, but she valued most highly the respect of her fellow pilots, who now understood that her achievements resulted from skill and courage, rather than reckless bravado. The doubts that had followed her throughout her career were replaced by admiration from aviators who had witnessed the impossible become reality. Years later, Sarah would be promoted to squadron commander, leading the same unit where she had once faced skepticism about her abilities. Her rescue of Guardian became part of the squadron's heritage, inspiring new generations of pilots to push beyond conventional limitations when circumstances demanded exceptional performance. The mission that began with experts claiming it couldn't be done ended with a new understanding of what was possible when skill, determination, and courage combined to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Sarah Rodriguez had proven that the word impossible was simply a challenge waiting for the right pilot to prove it wrong.